14th of July, 1754. 1. By staying at the Green Dragon, we were in the right place to hear of any rumblings against us, and my man Thomas kept his ear to the ground. Not that it was much of a chore for him, of course. Listening out for any signs of a plot against us meant supping ale while he eavesdropped on conversations and pressed others for gossip. He was very good at that. He needed to be. We had made enemies. Silas, of course, but most worryingly, General Edward Braddock. Last night I had sat at the desk in my room to write my journal. My hidden blade was on the table beside me, my sword within easy reach in case Braddock launched his inevitable retributive strike straight away, and I knew that this was how it would be from now on. Sleeping with one eye open, weapons never far from hand, always looking over our shoulders, every strange face belonging to a potential enemy. Just the thought of it was exhausting. But what other choice was there? According to Slater, Braddock had renounced the Templar Order. He was a loose cannon now, and the one thing worse than a loose cannon is a loose cannon with an army at his disposal. I could at least console myself with knowing that I now had a hand-picked team, and once again we were assembled in the back room, boosted by the addition of John Pitcairn, a more formidable proposition for either of our two opponents. As I entered the room, they rose to greet me, even Thomas, who seemed more sober than usual. I cast my eye over them. Benjamin's wounds had healed nicely. John seemed to have cast off the shackles of his commission with Braddock, his preoccupied air replaced by a new lightness of spirit. Charles was still a British Army officer, and was worried that Braddock might recall him, and consequently, when not looking down his nose at Thomas, wore a concerned look, while William stood at his lectern, holding a quill in his hand, still hard at work comparing the markings on the amulet with the book and his own maps and graphs, still perplexed, the telling details still eluding him. I had an idea about that. I gestured at them to take their seats, and sat among them. Gentlemen, I believe I found the solution to our problem. Or rather, Odysseus has. The mention of the Greek hero's name had a somewhat varied effect on my companions, and as William, Charles, and Benjamin all nodded sagely, John and Thomas looked somewhat confused, Thomas being the least self-conscious. Odysseus? Is he a new guy? He belched. The Greek hero, you lobcock, said Charles, disgusted. Allow me to explain, I said. We'll enter Silas's fort under the pretence of kinship. Once inside, we spring our trap, free the captives, and kill the slaver. I watched as they absorbed my plan. Thomas was the first to speak. Dodgy. Dodgy, he grinned. I like it. Then let us begin, I continued. First, we need to find ourselves a convoy. 2. Charles and I were on a rooftop overlooking one of Boston's public squares, both dressed as redcoats. I looked down at my own uniform. There was still a little of Slater's blood on my brown leather belt, and a stain on the white stockings, but otherwise I looked the part. Charles, too, even though he picked at his uniform. I'd forgotten how uncomfortable these uniforms are. Necessary, I'm afraid, I said, in order to properly effect our deception. I looked at him. He wouldn't have to suffer for long, at least. The convoy should be here soon, I told him. We'll attack on my signal. Understood, sir, replied Charles. In the square below us, an upturned cart blocked the far exit, and two men were huffing and puffing as they tried to turn it the right way up again. Or pretending to huff and puff and turn the cart the right way up, I should say, because the two men were Thomas and Benjamin, and the cart had been deliberately tipped over by all four of us a few moments before, strategically placed to block the exit. Not far away from it were John and William, who waited in the shadows of a nearby blacksmith's hut, sitting on upturned buckets with their hats pulled down low over their eyes, a couple of smithies taking a break, lazing the day away, watching the world go by. The trap was set. I put my spyglass to my eye and looked over the landscape beyond the square, and this time I saw them. The convoy, a squad of 9 redcoats making its way towards us. One of them was driving a hay cart, and beside him on the board was... I adjusted the focus. It was a Mohawk woman. A beautiful Mohawk woman, who, despite the fact that she was chained in place, wore a proud, defiant expression and sat straight, in marked contrast to the redcoat who sat beside her driving, whose shoulders were hunched and who had a long-stemmed pipe in his mouth. She had a bruise on her face, I realized, and was surprised to feel a surge of anger at the sight of it. I wondered how long ago they'd caught her, and how, indeed, they'd managed it. Evidently she'd put up a fight. "Sir," said Charles from by my side, prompting me, "hadn't you better give the signal?" I cleared my throat. "Of course, Charles," I said, and put my fingers in my mouth and gave a low whistle, watching as my comrades below exchanged "ready" signals, and Thomas and Benjamin kept up the pretence of trying to upturn the cart. We waited. We waited until the redcoats marched into the square and found the cart blocking their way. "What the hell is this?" said one of the front guards. "1,000 pardons, sirs. Seems we've had ourselves an unhappy little accident," said Thomas, with open hands and an ingratiating smile. The lead redcoat took note of Thomas's accent and at once assumed a contemptuous look. He went a shade of purple, not quite angry enough to match the colour of his tunic, but deep enough. "Get it sorted, and quickly," he snapped, and Thomas touched a servile hand to his forelock before turning back to help Benjamin with the cart. "Course, my lord, at once," he said. Charles and I, now on our bellies, watched. John and William sat with their faces hidden, but they, too, watched the scene as the redcoats, rather than simply marching around the cart or even, God forbid, helping Thomas and Benjamin to put the cart straight, stood and looked on as the lead guard became more and more furious, until his temper finally snapped. "Look, either get your cart right or we're riding through it." "Please don't." I saw Thomas's eyes dart up to the rooftop where we lay, then across to where William and John sat ready, their hands now on the hilts of their swords, and he spoke the action phrase, which was, "We're nearly finished." In one movement, Benjamin had drawn his sword and run through the nearest man, while before the lead guard had a chance to react, Thomas had done the same, a dagger appearing from within his sleeve, which was just as quickly embedded into the lead guard's eye. At the same time, William and John burst from cover, and 3 men fell beneath their blades, while Charles and I jumped from above, catching those nearest by surprise. 4 men died. We didn't even give them the dignity of breathing their last breath with dignity. Worried about getting their clothes stained with blood, we were already stripping the dying men of their uniforms. In moments we had pulled the bodies into some stables, shut and bolted the door, and we then stood in the square, 6 redcoats who had taken the place of 9. A new convoy. I looked around. The square had not been busy before, but now it was deserted. We had no idea who might have been a witness to the ambush. Colonials who hated the British and were glad to see them fall. British Army sympathisers who even now were on their way to Southgate Fort to warn Silas about what had happened. We had no time to lose. I jumped into the driver's seat and the Mohawk woman pulled away slightly, as far as her manacles would allow anyway, and gave me a wary but mutinous look. "We're here to help you," I tried to reassure her, "along with those held within Southgate Fort." "Free me, then," she said. Regretfully, I told her, "Not until we're inside. I can't chance an inspection at the gate going wrong," and was rewarded with a disgusted look, as though to say it was just as she'd expected. "I'll see you safe," I insisted. "You have my word." I shook the reins and the horses began to move, my men walking either side of me. "Do you know anything of Silas's operation?" I asked the Mohawk woman. "How many men we might expect? The nature of their defences?" But she said nothing. "You must be pretty important to him if you were given your own escort," I pressed. And still she ignored me. "I wish you'd trust us. Though I suppose it's only natural for you to be wary." "So be it." When she still didn't answer, I realized my words were wasted and decided to shut up. When at last we reached the gates, a guard stepped forward. "Hold," he said. I tightened the reins and we drew to a stop, me and my redcoats. Looking past the prisoner, I tipped my hat to the guards. "Evening, gentlemen." The sentry was in no mood for pleasantries, I could tell. "State your business," he said flatly, staring at the Mohawk woman with interested, lustful eyes. She returned his stare with the venomous look of her own. For a moment I mused that when I'd first arrived in Boston, I'd wanted to see what changes British rule had wrought on this country, what effect our government had had on its people. For the native Mohawk, it was clear to see that any effect had not been for the good. We talked piously of saving this land. Instead, we were corrupting it. I indicated the woman now. "Delivery for Silas," I said, and the guard nodded, licked his lips, then rapped on the door for it to open, for us to trundle slowly forward. Inside, the fort was quiet. We found ourselves near to the battlements, low, dark stone walls where cannons were ranged to look out over Boston, towards the sea, and redcoats with muskets slung over their shoulders patrolled back and forth. The focus of their attention was outside the walls. They feared an attack from the French, and looking down from their battlements hardly gave us a second glance as we trundled in on our cart, and trying to look as casual as possible, made our way to a secluded section, where the first thing I did was to cut the woman free. "See? I'm freeing you, just as I said I would. Now, if you'll allow me to explain." But her answer was no. With a final glare at me, she had leapt from the cart and disappeared into the darkness, leaving me to stare after her with a distinct feeling of unfinished business, wanting to explain myself to her, wanting to spend more time with her. Thomas went to go after her, but I stopped him. "Let her go," I said. "But she'll give us away," he protested. I looked at where she had been. Already she was a memory, a ghost. "No, she won't," I said, and got down, casting a look around to make sure we were alone in the quadrangle, then gathering the others to give them their orders. Free the captives and avoid detection. They nodded grimly, each of them committed to the task. "What of Silas?" asked Benjamin. I thought of the snickering man I had seen at the warehouse, who had left Benjamin to the mercy of Cutter. I remembered Benjamin's pledge to have his head, and looked at my friend now. "He dies," I said. I watched as the men melted away into the night, and decided to keep a close watch on Charles, my pupil, and saw as he approached a group of redcoats and introduced himself. I glanced across the quadrangle to see that Thomas had inveigled himself with another of the patrols. William and John, meanwhile, were walking casually in the direction of a building I thought was probably the stockade, where the prisoners were kept, where a guard was even now shifting and moving to block their way. I looked to check that the other guards were being kept occupied by Charles and Thomas, and when I was satisfied, gave John a surreptitious thumbs up, then saw him exchange a quick word with William as they came to the guard. "Can I help you?" I heard the guard say, his voice drifting over the quad just as John kneed him in the bollocks. With a low groan like an animal in a trap, he dropped his pike-staff and fell to his knees. Straight away, John was feeling at his waist and retrieving a key-ring. Then, with his back to the quad, he opened the door, grabbed a torch from a bracket outside, and disappeared inside. I glanced around. None of the guards had seen what was going on at the stockade. Those on the battlements were diligently staring out to sea. Those inside had their attention diverted by Charles and Thomas. Looking back at the door of the stockade, I saw John reappear, then usher out the first of the prisoners. And suddenly one of the troops on the battlements saw what was happening. "Oi, you there! What's your game?" he shouted, already levelling his musket, and the cry went up. Immediately I dashed over to the battlements where the first redcoat was about to pull the trigger, bounded up the stone steps, and was upon him, thrusting my blade under his jaw in one clean move. I dropped into a crouch and let his body fall over me, springing from beneath it to spear the next guard in his heart. A third man had his back to me, drawing a bead on William, but I whipped my blade across the backs of his legs, then delivered the coup de grace to the back of his neck when he fell. Not far away, William thanked me with a raised hand, then turned to meet another guard. His sword swung as a redcoat fell beneath the blade, and when he turned to meet a second man, his face was stained with blood. In moments, all of the guards were dead, but the door to one of the outbuildings had opened, and Silas had appeared, already angry. "An hour of quiet was all I asked," he roared. "Instead, I'm awakened not 10 minutes later by this cacophonous madness. I expect an explanation, and it had best be good." He was stopped in his tracks, his outburst dying on his lips as the colour drained from his face. All around the quad were the bodies of his men, and his head jerked as he looked across to the stockade, where the door hung open, natives pouring out, and John urging them to move more quickly. Silas drew his sword as more men appeared from behind him. "How?" he shrieked. "How did this happen? My precious merchandise set free. It's unacceptable. Rest assured I'll have the heads of those responsible. But first we clean up this mess." His guards were pulling on tunics, strapping swords to their waists, priming muskets. The quadrangle, empty but for corpses a moment ago, was suddenly filled with more troops eager for retribution. Silas was beside himself, screaming at them, frantically waving at the troops to take up their arms, calming himself as he continued. "Seal the fort! Kill any who try to escape! I don't care if they be one of us or one of them. To approach the gate is to be made a corpse. Am I understood?" The fighting continued. Charles, Thomas, William, John, and Benjamin moved among the men and made the most of their disguises. The men they attacked were reduced to fighting among themselves, not sure which man in an army uniform was friend and which an enemy. The natives, unarmed, sheltered to wait the fighting out, even as a group of Silas's redcoats formed a line at the entrance to the fort. I saw my chance. Silas had positioned himself to one side of his troops, and was exhorting them to be ruthless. Silas, it was clear, did not care who died as long as his precious merchandise was not allowed to escape, as long as his pride was not damaged in the process. I motioned to Benjamin, and we moved up close to Silas, saw that he had spotted us out of the corner of his eye. For a moment I could see the confusion play across his features, until he realized that, firstly, we were two of the interlopers, and secondly, he had no means of escape, as we stood blocking him from reaching the rest of his men. To all intents and purposes, we looked like a pair of loyal bodyguards keeping him from harm. "You don't know me," I told him. "But I believe the two of you are well acquainted," I said, and Benjamin Church stepped forward. "I made a promise to you, Silas," said Benjamin. "One I intend to keep." It was over in seconds. Benjamin was far more merciful with Silas than Cutter had been with him. With their leader dead, the fort's defence broke up, the gates opened, and we allowed the rest of the redcoats to pour out. Behind them came the Mohawk prisoners, and I saw the woman from earlier. Rather than escaping, she'd stayed to help her people. She was courageous as well as beautiful and spirited. As she helped members of her tribe away from the accursed fort, our eyes met, and I found myself entranced by her. And then she was gone. November 15th, 1754. 1. It was freezing, and snow covered the ground all around us as we set off early this morning and rode towards Lexington in pursuit of— perhaps obsession is too strong a word. Preoccupation, then. My preoccupation with the Mohawk woman from the cart. Specifically, with finding her. Why? If Charles had asked me, I'd have told him that I wanted to find her because I knew her English was good, and I thought she would be a useful contact within the Mohawk to help locate the precursor site. That's what I would have said if Charles had asked me why I wanted to find her, and it would have been partly the truth. Partly. Anyway, Charles and I took one of my expeditions, this one out to Lexington, when he said, "I'm afraid I have some bad news, sir." "What is it, Charles?" "Braddock's insisting I return to service under him. I've tried to beg off, to no avail," he said sadly. "No doubt he's still angry about losing John. To say nothing of the shaming we gave him," I responded thoughtfully, wondering if I could have finished it then when I had the chance. "Do as he asks. In the meantime, I'll work on having you released." How? I wasn't sure. After all, there was a time when I could have relied on a stiff letter from Reginald to change Braddock's mind, but it had become clear that Braddock no longer had any affinity with our ways. "I'm sorry to trouble you," said Charles. "Not your fault," I replied. I was going to miss him. After all, he had already done a lot to locate my mystery woman, who, according to him, was to be found outside Boston, in Lexington, where she was apparently stirring up trouble against the British, who were led by Braddock. Who could blame her, after seeing her people imprisoned by Silas? So Lexington was where we were, at a recently vacated hunting camp. "She's not too far away," Charles told me. And did I imagine it? Or did I feel my pulse quicken a little? It had been a long time since any woman had made me feel this way. My life had been spent either in studying or moving around, and as for women in my bed, there had been nobody serious. The occasional washerwoman during my service with the Coldstreams, waitresses, landlords' daughters, women who had provided solace and comfort, physical and otherwise, but nobody I'd have described as at all special. This woman, though. I had seen something in her eyes, as if she was something of a kindred spirit. Another loner, another warrior, another bruised soul who looked at the world with weary eyes. I studied the camp. The fire's only just been snuffed, the snow recently disturbed. I looked up. She's close. I dismounted, but when I saw Charles was about to do the same, I stopped him. Best you return to Braddock, Charles, before he grows suspicious. I can handle things from here. He nodded, reined his horse round, and I watched as they left, then turned my attention to the snow-covered ground around me, wondering about my real reason for sending him off, and knowing exactly what it was. 2. I crept through the trees. It had begun to snow again, and the forest was strangely silent, but for the sound of my own breathing, which billowed in vapours in front of me. I moved fast, but stealthily, and it wasn't long before I saw her, or at least the back of her. She was kneeling in the snow, a musket leaning against a tree as she examined a snare. I came closer, as quietly as I could, only to see her tense. She'd heard me. God, she was good. And in the next instant she had rolled to her side, snatched up the musket, thrown a look behind her, then taken off into the woods. I ran after her. "Please stop running," I called as we flew through the snow-blanketed woodland. "I only wish to talk. I'm not your enemy." But she kept on going. I dashed nimbly through the snow, moving fast and easily negotiating the terrain. But she was faster, and next she took to the trees, raising herself off the hard-to-negotiate snow and swinging from branch to branch wherever she was able. In the end, she took me further and further into the forest, and would have escaped were it not for a piece of bad fortune. She tripped on a tree root, stumbled, fell, and I was upon her at once. But not to attack, to come to her aid, and I held up a hand, breathing hard as I managed to say, "Me, Hightam, I come in peace." She looked at me as though she hadn't understood a word I'd said. I felt the beginnings of a panic. Maybe I'd been wrong about her in the cart. Maybe she couldn't speak English at all. Until suddenly she replied with, "Are you touched in the head?" Perfect English. "Oh, sorry." She gave a disgusted shake of her head. "What do you want?" "Well, your name, for one." My shoulders heaved as I gradually caught my breath, which was steaming in the freezing cold. And then, after a period of indecision, I could see it playing across her face, she said, "I am Kanyazio." "Just call me Tio," she said, when I tried and failed to repeat her name back to her. "Now tell me why it is you're here." I reached around my neck and took off the amulet to show her. "Do you know what this is?" Without warning, she grabbed my arm. "You have one?" she asked. For a second I was confused, until I realized she was looking not at the amulet, but at my hidden blade. I watched her for a moment, feeling what I can only describe as a strange mixture of emotions: pride, admiration, then trepidation, as accidentally she ejected the blade. To her credit, though, she didn't flinch, just looked up at me with wide brown eyes, and I felt myself fall a little deeper as she said, "I've seen your little secret." I smiled back, trying to look more confident than I felt, and raised the amulet, starting again. "This," I dangled it. "Do you know what it is?" Taking it in her hand, She gazed at it. "Where did you get it?" "From an old friend," I said, thinking of Miko and offering a silent prayer for him. I wondered, should it have been him here instead of me? An assassin instead of a Templar? "I've only seen such markings in one other place," she said, and I felt an instant thrill. "Where?" It is forbidden for me to speak of it." I leaned towards her. I looked into her eyes, hoping to convince with the strength of my conviction. "I saved your people. Does this mean nothing to you?" She said nothing. "Look," I pressed, "I am not the enemy." And perhaps she thought of the risks we had taken at the fort, how we had freed so many of her people from Silas. And maybe she saw something in me she liked. Either way, she nodded, then replied, "Near here there is a hill. On top of it grows a mighty tree. Come, we'll see if you speak the truth." 3. She led me there and indicated below us where there was a town she told me was called Concord. "The town hosts soldiers who seek to drive my people from these lands. They are led by a man known as the Bulldog," she said. The realization dawned. Edward Braddock. She rounded on me. "You know him?" "He's no friend of mine," I assured her, and never had I been more sincere. "Every day more of my people are lost to men like him," she said fiercely. "And I suggest we put a stop to it, together." She looked hard at me. There was doubt in her eyes, but I could see hope as well. "What do you propose?" Suddenly I knew. I knew exactly what had to be done. "We have to kill Edward Braddock." I let the information sink in, then added, "But first we have to find him." We began to head down the hill towards Concord. "I don't trust you," she said flatly. "I know. Yet you remain." "That I might prove you wrong." "It will not happen." Her jaw was set. She believed it. I had a long way to go with this mysterious, captivating woman. In town, we approached the tavern, where I stopped her. "Wait here," I said. "A Mohawk woman is likely to raise suspicions, if not muskets." She shook her head, instead pulling up her hood. "This is hardly the first time I've been among your people," she said. "I can handle myself." I hoped so. We entered to find groups of Braddock's men drinking with a ferocity that would have impressed Thomas Hickey, and we moved among them, eavesdropping on their conversations. What we discovered was that Braddock was on the move. The British planned to enlist the Mohawk to march further north and go against the French. Even the men seemed frightened of Braddock, I realized. All talk was of how merciless he could be, and how even his officers were scared of him. One name I overheard was George Washington. He was the only one brave enough to question the general, according to a pair of gossiping redcoats I eavesdropped upon. When I moved through to the back of the tavern, I found the self-same George Washington sitting with another officer at a secluded table, and loitered close by in order to listen in to their conversation. "Tell me you've good news," said one. "General Braddock refused the offer. There will be no truce," said the other. "Damn it." "Why, George? What reason did he give?" The man he called George, whom I took to be George Washington, replied. "He said a diplomatic solution was no solution at all, that allowing the French to retreat would only delay an inevitable conflict, one in which they now have the upper hand. There's merit in those words, much as I hate to admit it. Still, can't you see this is unwise? It doesn't sit well with me either. We're far from home, with forces divided. Worse, I fear private bloodlust makes Braddock careless. It puts the men at risk. I'd rather not be delivering grim news to mothers and widows because the bulldog wanted to prove a point. Where is the general now? Rallying the troops. And then it's on to Fort Duquesne, I assume? Eventually. The march north will surely take time. At least this will be ended soon. I tried, John. I know, my friend. I know. Braddock has left to rally his troops, I told Zio outside the tavern. And they're marching on Fort Duquesne. It'll be a while yet until they're ready, which gives us time to form a plan. No need, she said. We'll ambush him near the river. Go and gather your allies. I will do the same. I'll send word when it's time to strike. 8th of July, 1755. It has been nearly 8 months since Zio told me to wait for her word. But at last it came, and we travelled to the Ohio country, where the British were about to begin a major campaign against the French forts. Braddock's expedition was aimed at overthrowing Fort Duquesne. We had all been busy in that time, and none more than Zio, I discovered, when we did eventually meet, and I saw that she had brought with her many troops, many of them natives. All these men are from many different tribes, united in their desire to see Braddock sent away, she said. The Abenaki, the Lenape, the Shawnee. And you? I said to her, when the introductions had been made. Who do you stand for? A thin smile. Myself. What would you have me do? I said at last. You will help the others to prepare. She wasn't joking. I put my men to work, and joined them building blockades, filling a cart with gunpowder in order to make a booby trap, until everything was in place, and I found myself grinning, saying to Zio, I can't wait to see the look on Braddock's face when the trap is finally sprung. She gave me a distrusting look. You take pleasure in this? You're the one who asked me to help you kill a man. It does not please me to do so. He is sacrificed so that the land and the people who live on it might be saved. What motivates you? Some past wrongs? A betrayal? Or is it simply the thrill of the hunt? Mollified, I said, You misread me. She indicated through the trees, towards the Monongahela River. Braddock's men will be here soon, she said. We should prepare for their arrival. 9th of July, 1755. 1. A Mohawk scout on horseback quickly spoke some words I didn't understand, but as he gestured back down the valley towards the Monongahela, I could guess what he was saying, that Braddock's men had crossed the river and would soon be upon us. He left to inform the rest of the ambush, and Zio, lying by my side, confirmed what I already knew. They come, she said simply. I'd been enjoying lying next to her in our hiding place, the proximity of her. So it was with a measure of regret that I looked out from beneath a fringe of undergrowth to see the regiment emerge from the tree line at the bottom of the hill. I heard it at the same time, a distant rumble growing louder which heralded the arrival of not a patrol, not a scouting party, but an entire regiment of Braddock's men. First came the officers on horseback, then the drummers and bandsmen, then the troops marching, then porters and camp followers guarding the baggage train. The entire column stretched back almost as far as the eye could see. And at the head of the regiment, the general himself, who sat gently rocking with the rhythm of his horse, his freezing breath clouding the air ahead of him, and George Washington by his side. Behind the officers, the drummers kept up a steady beat, for which we were eternally grateful, because in the trees were French and Indian snipers. On the high ground were scores of men who lay on their bellies, the undergrowth pulled over them, waiting for the sign to attack. 100 or more men waiting to spring the ambush. 100 men who held their breath, as suddenly General Braddock held up his hand. An officer on his other side barked an order, the drums stopped, and the regiment came to a halt, horses whinnying and sneezing, pawing at the snowy, frozen ground, the column gradually descending into silence. An eerie calm settled around the men in the column. In the ambush, we held our breath, and I'm sure every man and woman like me wondered if we'd been discovered. George Washington looked at Braddock, then behind, where the rest of the column, officers, soldiers, and followers stood waiting expectantly, then back at Braddock. He cleared his throat. "Everything all right, sir?" he asked. Braddock took a deep breath. "Just savouring the moment," he replied, then took another deep breath and added, "No doubt many wonder why it is we've pushed so far west. These are wild lands, as yet untamed and unsettled. But it shall not always be so. In time, our holdings will no longer suffice, and that day is closer than you think. We must ensure that our people have ample room to grow and further prosper, which means we need more land. The French understand this and endeavour to prevent such growth. They skirt around our territory, erecting forts and forging alliances, awaiting the day they may strangle us with the noose they've built. This must not come to pass. We must sever the cord and send them back. This is why we ride, to offer them one last chance. The French will leave, or they will die." By my side, Theo gave me a look, and I could see that there was nothing she would like better than to prick the man's pomposity straight away. Sure enough. "Now is the time to strike," she hissed. "Wait," I said. When I turned my head, I found she was looking at me, and our faces were just an inch or so apart. To scatter the expedition is not enough. We must ensure Braddock fails, else he is sure to try again. Kill him, I meant, and there would never be a better time to strike. I thought quickly, then, pointing at a small scouting convoy that had peeled away from the main regiment, said, "I'll disguise myself as one of his own, and make my way to his side. Your ambush will provide the perfect cover for me to deliver the killing blow." I made my way down towards the ground and stole towards the scouts. Silently, I engaged my blade, slid it into the neck of the nearest soldier, and was unbuttoning his jacket before he'd even hit the floor. The regiment, some 300 yards away now, began to move with a rumble like approaching thunder. The drums began again, and the Indians used the sudden noise as cover to begin moving in the trees, adjusting their positions, readying the ambush. I mounted the scout's horse and spent a moment or so calming the animal, letting her get used to me before taking her down a small incline towards the column. An officer, also on horseback, spotted me and ordered me back into position, so I waved an apology, then began to trot towards the head of the column, past the baggage train and camp followers, past the marching soldiers, who threw me resentful looks and talked about me behind my back, and past the band, until I came almost level with the front of the column. Close now, but also more vulnerable. close enough to hear Braddock talking to one of his men, one of his inner circle, his mercenaries. "The French recognise they are weak in all things," he was saying, "and so they have allied themselves with the savages that inhabit these woods. Little more than animals, they sleep in trees, collect scalps, and even eat their own dead. Mercy is too kind for them. Spare no one." I didn't know whether to chuckle or not. Eat their own dead? Nobody still believed that, surely. The officer seemed to be thinking the same thing. "But, sir," he protested, "those are just stories. The natives I have known do nothing of the sort." In the saddle, Braddock rounded on him. "Are you calling me a liar?" he roared. "I misspoke, sir," said the mercenary, trembling. "I'm sorry. Truly, I am grateful to serve." "Have served, you mean?" snarled Braddock. "Sir?" said the man, frightened. "You are grateful to have served," repeated Braddock, drew his pistol, and shot the man. The officer fell back from his horse, a red hole where his face had been, his body thumping to the tinder-dry forest floor. Meanwhile, the report of the gun had scared the birds from the trees, and the column suddenly drew to a halt, the men pulling muskets from shoulders, drawing weapons, believing they were under attack. For a few moments they remained at full alert, until the order came to stand down, and the word filtered back to them, a message delivered in hushed tones. The general had just shot an officer. I was near enough to the front of the column to see George Washington's shocked reaction, and he alone had the courage to stand up to Braddock. "General!" Braddock rounded on him, and perhaps there was a moment in which Washington wondered if he was to receive the same treatment. Until Braddock thundered, "I will not tolerate doubt among those I command, nor sympathy for the enemy. I've no time for insubordination." Bravely, George Washington countered, "None denied he erred, sir. Only he paid for his treachery as all traitors must. If we are to win this war against the French, nay, when we win this war, it will be because men like you obeyed men like me, and did so without hesitation. We must have order in our ranks and a clear chain of command, leaders and followers. Without such structure, there can be no victory. Have I understood?" Washington nodded, but quickly looked away, keeping his true feelings to himself. And then, as the column moved off once more, moved away from the front on the pretext of attending to business elsewhere, I saw my chance, and manoeuvred my way to behind Braddock, falling into position by his side, just slightly behind so that he wouldn't see me. Not yet. I waited, biding my time, until suddenly there was a commotion from behind us, and the officer on the other side of Braddock peeled away to investigate, leaving just the two of us up front, me and General Braddock. I drew my pistol. "Edward," I said, and enjoyed the moment as he swiveled in his saddle, and his eyes went from me to the barrel of my pistol, and then to me again. His mouth opened, about to do what, I wasn't sure. Call for help, probably. But I wasn't going to give him the chance. There was no escape for him now. "Not so fun on the other end of the barrel, is it?" I said, and squeezed the trigger. At exactly the same time as the regiment came under attack. Damn, the trap had been sprung too soon. My horse gave a start, and the shot went wide. Braddock's eyes flashed with hope and triumph as suddenly there were Frenchmen all around us, and arrows began raining down from the trees above us. Braddock pulled on the reins of his horse with a yell, and in the next moment was mounting the verge towards the trees, while I sat, my spent pistol in my hand, stunned by the abrupt turn of events. The hesitation almost cost me my life. I found myself in the path of a Frenchman, blue jacket, red breeches, his sword swinging and heading straight for me. It was too late to engage my blade. Too late to draw my sword. And then, just as rapidly, the Frenchman was flying from his saddle, as though jerked on a piece of rope, the side of his head exploding into a red spray. In the same moment I heard the gunshot and saw, on a horse behind him, my friend Charles Lee. I nodded my thanks, but would have to give him more effusive gratitude later, as I saw Braddock disappearing into the trees, his feet kicking at the flank of his steed, and casting a quick look behind him, seeing me about to give chase. 2. Yelling encouragement at my horse, I followed Braddock into the forest, passing Indians and Frenchmen who were rushing down the hill towards the column. Ahead of me, arrows rained down on Braddock, but none found its target. Now, too, the traps we had laid were being sprung. I saw the cart, primed with gunpowder, come trundling out of the trees and scatter a group of riflemen, before exploding and sending riderless horses scattering away from the column, while from above me, native snipers picked off frightened and disorientated soldiers. Braddock stayed frustratingly ahead of me, until at last the terrain was too much for his horse, which reared up and sent him falling to the ground. Howling in pain, Braddock rolled in the dirt and briefly fumbled for his pistol before deciding against it, pulled himself to his feet, and began to run. For me, it was a simple matter to catch him up, and I spurred my horse on. "I never took you for a coward, Edward," I said as I reached him, and levelled my pistol. He stopped in his tracks, span around and met my gaze. There was the arrogance, the scorn I knew so well. "Come on, then," he sneered. I trotted closer, my gun held, when, suddenly, there was the sound of a gunshot. My steed fell dead beneath me, and I crashed to the forest floor. "Such arrogance!" I heard Braddock call. "I always knew it would be the end of you." Now at his side was George Washington, who raised his musket to aim at me. Instantly I had a fierce, bittersweet sense of consolation that at least it should be Washington, who clearly had a conscience and was nothing like the general, who was to end my life, and I closed my eyes, ready to accept death. I regretted that I had never seen my father's killers brought to justice, and that I had come tantalizingly close to discovering the secrets of those who came before, but never entered the storehouse. And I wished that I'd been able to see the ideals of my order spread throughout the world. In the end, I had not been able to change the world, but I had at least changed myself. I had not always been a good man, but I had tried to be a better one. But the shot never came, and when I opened my eyes, it was to see Washington knocked off his horse, and Braddock swinging round to see his officer on the deck, tussling with a figure that I recognized immediately as Zio, who had not only taken Washington by surprise, but had disarmed him and had her knife to his throat. Braddock used the opportunity to flee, and I scrambled to my feet, racing across the clearing to where Zio held Washington firm. "Hurry," she snapped at me, "before he gets away." I hesitated, not wanting to leave her alone with Washington, and more troops on the way, no doubt, but she struck him with the hilt of her knife, sending his eyes rolling, dazed, and I knew she could take care of herself. So I took off after Braddock once again, this time both of us on foot. He still had his pistol, and darted behind a huge tree trunk, spinning and raising his gun arm. I stopped and rolled into cover at the same time as he fired, heard the shot thump harmlessly into a tree to my left, and without pausing leapt out of my cover to continue the chase. He had already taken to his feet, hoping to outrun me, but I was 30 years younger than him. I hadn't spent the last 2 decades getting fat in charge of an army, and I hardly broke a sweat as he began to slow. He glanced behind, and his hat tumbled off as he misstepped and almost fell over the raised roots of a tree. I slowed, let him regain his balance and continue running, then chased after him, barely jogging now. Behind us, the sounds of gunshots, of screams, of men and animals in pain became fainter. The forest seemed to drown out the noise of battle, leaving just the sound of Braddock's ragged breathing and his footfalls on the soft forest floor. Again he glanced behind and saw me, saw that I was barely even running now, and finally he dropped, exhausted, to his knees. I flicked my finger, engaged the blade, and came close to him. Shoulders heaving as he fought for breath, he said, "Why, Hightam?" "Your death opens a door." "It's nothing personal," I said. I plunged the blade into him and watched as blood bubbled up around the steel, and his body tautened and jerked with the agony of impalement. "Well, maybe it's a little bit personal," I said, as I lowered his dying body to the ground. "You've been a pain in my arse after all." "But we are brothers in arms," he said. His eyelids fluttered as death beckoned to him. "Once, perhaps. No longer. Do you think I've forgotten what you did? All those innocents slaughtered without a second thought? And for what? It does not engender peace to cut your way to resolution." His eyes focused, and he looked at me. "Wrong," he said, with a surprising and sudden inner strength. "Were we to apply the sword more liberally and more often, the world would be possessed of far fewer troubles than it is today." I thought. "In this instance, I concur," I said. I took his hand and pulled off the ring he wore that bore the Templar crest. "Farewell, Edward," I said, and stood waiting for him to die. At that moment, however, I heard the sound of a group of soldiers approaching, and saw I had no time to make my escape. Instead, I dropped to my belly and wormed my way beneath a fallen tree trunk, where I was suddenly at eye level with Braddock. His head turned to me, his eyes gleamed, and I knew he'd give me away if he could. Slowly, his hand stretched out, his crooked finger trying to point in my direction as the men arrived. Damn! I should have delivered the killing blow. I saw the boots of the men who came into the clearing, wondered how the battle had gone, and saw George Washington shoulder his way through a small knot of troops to rush forward and kneel by the side of his dying general. Braddock's eyes fluttered still. His mouth worked as he tried to form words, the words to give me away. I steeled myself, counting the feet. 6 or 7 men at least. Could I take them? But, I realized, Braddock's attempts to alert his men to my presence were being ignored. Instead, George Washington had put his head to his chest, listened, then exclaimed, "He lives!" Beneath the tree trunk I closed my eyes and cursed as the men picked Braddock up and took him away. Later, I rejoined Zio. "It's done," I told her. She nodded. "Now I've upheld my part of the bargain. I expect that you will honour yours," I added. She nodded again and bade me to follow her, and we began to ride. 10th of July, 1755. We rode overnight, and at last she stopped and indicated a dirt mound ahead of us. It was almost as if it had appeared from the forest. I wondered if I would even have seen it had I been here by myself. My heart quickened, and I swallowed. Did I imagine it, or was it as though the amulet suddenly woke up around my neck, became heavier, warmer? I looked at her before walking to the opening, then slid inside, where I found myself in a small room that had been lined with simple ceramic. There was a ring of pictographs around the room, leading to a depression on the wall. An amulet-sized depression. I went to it and took the amulet from around my neck, pleased to see it glow slightly in my palm. Looking at Zio, who returned my gaze, her own eyes wide with trepidation, I approached the indentation, and as my eyes adjusted to the dark, saw that 2 figures painted on the wall knelt before it, offering their hands to it as though to make an offering. The amulet seemed to glow even more brightly now, as though the artifact itself were anticipating being reunited with the fabric of the chamber. How old was it, I wondered? How many millions of years before had the amulet been hewn from this very rock? I had been holding my breath, I realized, and let it out in a whoosh now, as I reached up and pressed the amulet into the hollow. Nothing happened. I looked at Zio, then from her to the amulet, where its former glow was beginning to fade, almost as though mirroring my own deflating expectations. My lips moved, trying to find words. No. I removed the amulet, then tried it again, but still nothing. You seem disappointed, she said at my side. I thought I held the key, I said, and was dismayed to hear the tone in my own voice, the defeat and disappointment, but that it would open something here. She shrugged. Well, this room is all there is. I expected... What had I expected? More. These images, what do they mean? I asked, recovering myself. Zio went to the wall to gaze at them. One in particular seemed to catch her eye. It was a god or a goddess wearing an ancient, intricate headdress. It tells the story of Iotsiti-son, she said intently, who came into our world and shaped it, that life might come. Hers was a hard journey, fraught with loss and great peril. But she believed in the potential of her children and what they might achieve. Though she is long gone from the physical world, her eyes still watch over us. Her ears still hear our words. Her hands still guide us. Her love still gives us strength. You've showed me a great kindness, Zio. Thank you. When she looked back at me, her face was soft. I am sorry you did not find what you seek. I took her hand. I should go, I said, not wanting to go at all, and in the end she stopped me. She leaned forward and kissed me. 13th of July, 1755. Master Kenway, did you find it then? They were the first words Charles Lee said to me when I entered our room at the Green Dragon Tavern. My men were all assembled, and they looked at me with expectant eyes, then faces that dropped when I shook my head no. It was not the right place, I confirmed. I fear the temple was nothing more than a painted cave. Still, it contained precursor images and script, which means we are close. We must redouble our efforts, expand our order, and establish a permanent base here, I continued. Though the site eludes us, I am confident we will find it. Truth, said John Pitcairn. Hear, hear, chimed Benjamin Church. Furthermore, I believe it is time we welcomed Charles into the fold. He has proven himself a loyal disciple and served unerringly since the day he came to us. You should be able to share in our knowledge and reap all the benefits such a gift implies, Charles. Are any opposed? The men stayed silent, casting approving looks at Charles. Very well. I went on. Charles, come. Stand. As he approached me, I said, Do you swear to uphold the principles of our order, and all of that for which we stand? I do. Never to share secrets, nor divulge the true nature of our work? I do. And to do so from now until death, whatever the cost? I do. The men stood. Then we welcome you into our fold, brother. Together we will usher in the dawn of a new world, one defined by purpose and order. Give me your hand. I took the ring I'd removed from Braddock's finger and pushed it onto Charles's. I looked at him. You are a Templar now. And at that he grinned. May the Father of Understanding guide us, I said, and the men joined me. Our team was complete. 1st of August, 1755. Do I love her? That question I find difficult to answer. All I knew was that I enjoyed being with her, and came to treasure the time we spent together. She was different. There was something about her I had never experienced in another woman. That spirit I spoke of before, it seemed to come through in her every word and gesture. I'd find myself looking at her, fascinated by the light that seemed permanently to burn in her eyes, and wondering, always wondering, what was going on inside. What was she thinking? I thought she loved me. I should say, I think she loves me. But she's like me. There's so much of herself she keeps hidden. And, like me, I think she knows that love cannot progress, that we cannot live out our lives together, either in this forest or in England, that there are too many barriers between us and our lives together. Her tribe, for a start. She has no desire to leave her life behind. She sees her place as with her people, protecting her land they feel is under threat from people like me. And I too have a responsibility to my people. The tenets of my order, are they in line with the ideals of her tribe? I'm not sure that they are. Asked to choose between Zio and the ideals I've been brought up to believe, which would I choose? These are the thoughts that have plagued me over the last few weeks, even as I have luxuriated in these sweet, stolen hours with Zio. I have wondered what to do.